Thank you, Dr. Ju. You hold the record now. It's 12 minutes. So since we head east, we'll continue going east, and we'll be listening to the experience and from Japan about actions to control the HFC emissions and promote alternatives, which will be presented by Mr. Kazuhiro Sato, who is the Senior Manager of International Affairs Department at the Japan Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Industry Association, JARAYA. He holds this post since April 2014 as a successor of Mr. Osami Kataoka, who is also with us here today, and he is engaged and involved in the cooperation with the European Environmental Regulation mainly. Sato-san, please.
Let me check how to operate. Okay. The pointer. Oh, right. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, facilitator, for introducing me, and thank you, organizer, to invite me here today. It's my great pleasure to be here to present, to make presentation today. Okay, today, I would like to talk about new regulation to control emission of HFCs in Japan. And the exact name of regulation is the Act of Rational Use and Proper Management of Fluorocarbons. So it will be quite a different approach, and I hope the presentation will be a good hint to you today. Okay, this is a timeline. Regulation published, OJ published in June last year, and now implementing act publishment is undergoing. Finally, it will enter into force in April next year. This is a summary of direction measure for HFCs in Japan. So there is some items to be tackled. We have existing regulation. The name is Fluorocarbons Recovery and Destruction Laws, but there are some items to be improved. First, as you can see, we can succeed the phase down of ODS, but instead of reduction of ODS, HFC has drastically increased. Under the current law, we try to recover the refrigerant, but the recovery ratio is around 30%. This is the recovered amount from 2007 to 2012. Actually, 30% of total amounts placed into market has recovered, but even recently, the ratio has not increased a lot, and this stayed around 30%. We are not very happy, and we need to take some additional action to improve this situation. And there is also another background, and we noticed the leakage was significant leakage found from the commercial refrigeration system in use, and there is some market situation change and the pressure from global movement. So we have decided to revise the regulation and start to launch from the next year. The point is, new regulation covers whole life cycle of refrigerant from production to destruction. So let's have a look at the scope. Current regulation focused recovery and destruction. However, as I explained, recovery ratio is not sufficient, just stayed around 30%. And as I explained, there is a drastic increase of HFC, and according to our investigation, the significant leakage from refrigeration system in use was found. So we expand the scope. The scope covers whole of refrigeration lifetime. First, for HFC producer and importer, low GWP HFCs or natural refrigerant are promoted. Second, manufacturer of equipment, the development of equipment with low GWP are highly promoted. And for users, periodical check and the proper maintenance are required. Not only the recovery, but also proper refill required. And finally, not only destruction, but also recycle of refrigerant are highly promoted. So we try to reuse refrigerant as much as possible. So let's see the detail in the next step. This is for manufacturer and the import of equipment. So we focused on the specific equipment in the left one. And we set target like this. Target GWP and target year. These equipment are widely and majorly used in Japan. So if we control these equipment successfully, the action will be very effective and very successful. Okay, let's look the detail of number 3. So not only the periodical and precise check, users also required to make a simplified periodical check. So daily, they should check the noise from air conditioner, and they also check the working condition in daily. So if they can detect the sign of leakage, they can take action in earlier stage. So this can lead to the reduction of leakage. Okay. This is expected reduction by new road. In 2020, 40% reduction is expected compared to the BAU base. And 2025, 50% reduction is expected. Okay, let me talk about little bit about our association's activity. Our member is working hard for new alternative refrigerant that you are very interested in. We have to consider 3E and S: safety, environmental performance, energy efficiency, and economic feasibility or economic availability. Tomorrow, my colleague will present risk assessment. Okay, finally, unfortunately, we have not reached to the ideal solution up to now. And we also have got a lot of items to tackle with. Actually, our industry has been proceeding with the development next generation refrigeration. However, we will continue working harder. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was probably the record so far, but my timekeeper went to look for the lunch arrangements. Meanwhile, I would like to introduce the next speaker. We come from Japan, and if we continue east, we actually come to the west. So I'm happy to introduce Dr. Federico Sanmartini from the United States. Federico, he's a Foreign Affairs Officer, oh, that's a very long name, in the Office of Environmental Quality and Transboundary Issues at the US State Department. Federico, he focuses on Montreal Protocol and air pollution, and he's a well-known face in the Executive Committee of the Montreal Protocol. Before joining the State Department, Federico was a program officer for the Board of Chemical Sciences and Technologies at the US National Academy of Science. Federico will speak about the US policy measures on HFCs, and I'm happy to welcome you here. Please.
Good morning, colleagues, and first, let me thank the organizers of the symposium for your kind invitation, and also a particular thanks to the government of the United Arab Emirates for your kind hospitality. It is very much appreciated. So before I talk to you about US policy measures on HFCs, I wanted to take a step back and explain why we care, why we think HFCs are a concern. I think as everyone in this room knows, HFCs are synthetic fluorinated greenhouse gases whose use and emissions are increasing rapidly because they are alternatives to ozone-depleting substances that we are phasing out under the Montreal Protocol. It's said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I wanted to just take a moment to walk through this figure here. And what you see on the y-axis is the CO2 equivalent emissions in gigatons per year. And what is shown in blue here are the GWP-weighted emissions of CFCs, halons, and other ozone-depleting substances that we have phased out under the Montreal Protocol. What is shown here in this hatched blue area is a world we avoided. Had it not been for the Montreal Protocol, this is the trajectory we would have been on. So under the Montreal Protocol, we have seen substantial climate benefits for the work we have undertaken together. Why we think HFCs are a concern is what is shown here in red. And that is, those are the projections of HFC emissions based on our transition to out of ozone-depleting substances. We know that globally, emissions of HFCs are increasing rapidly. Between 2004 and 2008, emissions of HFCs increased by about 8% a year. And in the United States, that's also no exception. HFC emissions were increasing rapidly. And unless we do something about it, they will continue to grow rapidly. We expect that without measures, HFC emissions will increase from about 1.5% of US CO2 equivalent emissions to about 3% in 2020 to about 4.5% in 2030. The importance of HFCs are reflected in the President's Climate Action Plan. And under that plan, the President directed the EPA's Significant New Alternatives Policy Program to approve climate-friendly alternatives and prohibit some uses of the most harmful alternatives. The President also directed the federal government to lead by example. So he directed the federal government to show leadership by purchasing cleaner alternatives to HFCs whenever feasible, and to transition to equipment using safe, more sustainable alternatives. The President's Climate Action Plan also includes an international component. The United States is a member of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which seeks to promote the development, commercialization, and adoption of climate-friendly alternatives, to encourage action, overcome barriers, and build international awareness and support for curbing HFCs. And I think, as everyone in this room probably knows, the United States, together with Mexico and Canada, has proposed an amendment to phase down HFCs under the Montreal Protocol. Since the President's Climate Action Plan was released, action on HFCs in the United States has accelerated. And on September 16th, a series of announcements were made on private sector commitments and executive actions. On the private sector commitments, I won't go into these in detail. I think you'll be hearing from some of these later on in the symposium. But suffice it to say that 22 major companies participated that span the entire HFC supply chain, from where the chemicals are produced to where the chemicals are used in manufacturing to where consumers see their use. And the commitments are huge. If you go back to that figure I showed from Velders et al., it's really the scale of climate benefits that we can achieve that is so important. So the commitments are equal to about 1.5% of the world's 2010 greenhouse gas emissions. That's of the world's, not just the United States. And that's the same thing as taking nearly 15 million cars off the road every year for the next 10 years. In addition, a series of executive actions were announced. the President called on EPA to continue to expand climate-friendly alternatives, to work with stakeholders to improve refrigerant management, and to work to provide information on technologies, policies, standards, and technical aspects of transition. In addition, the Department of Energy will fund research activities for HFC alternatives. I wanted to talk a little bit about what EPA has been doing on alternatives. Let me just say that the EPA has been extremely busy. In July 2014, EPA proposed expanding the list of acceptable